Yeah, you were talking earlier about tech and Silicon Valley and doing reportive work there. Media landscapes have changed so much because of social media and the way we consume long form and short form, or even like you do public radio. Things are changing, right? The media landscape has changed so much. How have you all been able to, especially as a legacy brand, keeping the what's been great for so long? How have you been able to continue to meet your target audience where they're at? Because I think there's so many places you can find people now. You have TikTok and Bookem and everything in between where people are building community. So I'm interested how you all think about that.
I'm of two minds with this, and this is just my own personal viewpoint, not representing NPR, but just really representing myself in this. I think that um, the media has to take a hard, long look at itself to understand that it may not have done its job to meet the moment for a long time. You know, the ability to find your tribe, to find your people, to hear voices that um, represent you is a huge gift. It's opened up the world. Those are the positives to this changing landscape. The negatives are the misinformation, the disinformation, the siloing, all of that stuff that has come with it. And I think we're at the beginning stages of that. And I think it might get a lot worse before it gets better. But I think that's what happens when something is dying. And I think like the traditional media landscape is dying. I'm particularly focused on reaching beyond the NPR ecosystem because I'll give you an example. When I go home to Detroit, huge swaths of people have no idea what NPR is. Like,
Yeah.
and that's a massive failure. You know, people laugh at that, but it's a massive failure because NPR stands for National Public Radio, heavy on the public. And so if we're truly public media, we should represent everyone and be available where everyone actually listens. So my focus with this show is to not only meet the audience that we have, which I value tremendously. There are diehards to public media who understands the value of it, and I want to keep that strong and vibrant and healthy. But I think it's also important that we understand where people are and we meet them where they are. But before we can do that, we have to understand that the people telling the news, the people who are sharing the news or sharing information and narratives, they have to come from different backgrounds and education levels and ethnicities and political affiliations. And it's not essential, it is essential to really fulfilling the public in public radio.
Yeah, and to that point about public radio and just kind of like some of the attacks that have happened to public, or as far as I'm just thinking about NPR or PBS, there's been like funding cuts and everything in between. Like, how have you been able to, make sure you kind of keep your, journalistic integrity and accessibility for people when you kind of are in a moment where public radio and is getting attacked and everything?
This is a really tough moment. And I'll tell you, if I had the answers, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would actually be out there like, I'd be like solving and handing out dollars to all of the member stations who are in a very serious way um, looking at a future that is pretty grim. A lot of public member stations will be closing or have announced that they are shutting their doors. And that means huge swaths of our country won't have access to the excellent journalism that those member stations provide. This is a moment of stillness for me personally, because I am someone who um, I'm not a decision maker in this on the ways that we can combat it, but I know that doing the job to the best of my ability, standing true to my journalistic principles while also offering all that I have to what I do is what I can do as those who are thinking about strategies and ways to connect and build and grow. They need to have a product to build people's trust on. And so that is my part. That's my piece of the puzzle. And that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, and especially since we're in a noisy world and just a lot of misinformation, kind of like what you're talking about earlier. How do you think people should, ha build their media literacy, I guess, in that sense? Because I feel like there's so much being thrown at us. I guess, how have you thought about that and being a place where people can have a good understanding of what's going on? Because like I said, I think there's so much. You'll read something on like I said, you'll read on something on, like, say, Twitter or something, and the moment later, you're like, oh, wait, that's not true. And then it's getting fact checked. And I just think media literacy is just not, I would say it's deteriorating, but it's just like it's changing and evolving. So I'm curious how you've thought about that as well.
I mean, I'm really big on discernment. We have to have discernment. We have to have research skills. We also have to keep up with technology. And that requires, if you're not someone like you and I who are constantly reading and constantly searching because you're interviewing people, it's something that it's a muscle that you have to build. And even for someone like me, you know, um, my kids, I feel like I have good strong discernment, and I can look at something and tell if it's fake or not. I always, like, I'll see an article and I'll say, okay, let me do some research if this is right or not. What is this publication? What, it looks legit, but let me dig deeper. But when it comes to AI stuff, like, I've shown my kids things and they will say, Mom, that's AI. And like right away, they could like look at it within a second. And so that made me realize that's actually a gift. It made me realize, okay, I think I know, but even I can be tricked. And so we're in a really interesting time where you can't take anything for face value. You've got to be extremely discerning and skeptical. And quite honestly, you should be skeptical of all media. You should be skeptical of NPR. You should be skeptical of the New York Times. You should be reading with discernment and asking yourself questions as you're reading it. I also think that time off the internet interacting with real people is so important. I have made it my mission um, this is new, so this has just happened in the last few months, to have at least 3 in-person interactions around activities and civic engagement each week. And I push myself, even if I'm tired at the end of the day, I'm going to go do those things so that I can interact with people, because you can't understand humanity from behind a screen. It does make us feel connected, but it's a false connection. It's not really true. And I want to amend that. It's true. It's real, because I have built amazing connections through social. I consider many people that I've never met friends because of how often we interact with each other. But there's nothing like you understanding yourself outside of your bubble than being out in the world. I felt most connected to the truth when I was out in the field every day as a reporter, because I was talking to people of different backgrounds and having civil discussions. It just taught me that real literacy starts with real human connection.
Mm. No, I was gonna say there's a big push for going back and touching grass, as people say, and
Right.
we're in a
Yeah.
very analog too. As much as things are changing so quickly, and like you said, AI and digital media is changing so much, there's also this very strong pushback to just be like analog and be in person and have these community moments and being around people just to have interesting conversations where you agree or disagree. I think both is okay, depending on as long as there's a level of respect against each other. I think that's always powerful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, last question on media, because I do think there is something that's changing fundamentally too, is when you think about, I think more broadly about people like Akai Sanat or like when we talk about streamers, right? And then you think about podcasters, and some of the biggest podcasts in the world aren't necessarily journalists. So I'm curious of like how you've seen that change and kind of that broadcast, because I think now people will. The reason I bring up someone like Kai Sanat, he recently was like he'll talk about he'll talk about music, but then he's like, okay, I'm not a critic, right? So I think there's a level of a lot of podcasters where they're like, hey, I'm a podcaster, but I'm not a journalist. So I'm curious of how you actually doing both in those spaces. Have you thought about that part of things?
Mm. That's really interesting. I consume a lot of folks who give information and are entertaining to watch or listen to, who are very clear that they're not journalists, but they're giving their opinion and their thoughts. And they open up my worldview sometimes. You know, I think that is just the reality that we live in. And um, right now, we're living in a free country that allows people to express themselves. And that's hugely important. I'm trying to think about, I'm thinking about your question because you know, I've throughout my career, I've really tried to show the full spectrum of humanity, and with a special emphasis on Black humanity, because I think that those are stories that we're only scratching the surface on being able to tell. And I think that those types of streamers, they represent people. So, you know, it's about representation and about you being able to see yourself fully and the people that you consume. As long as you are understanding, you know, as long as someone says, you know, I'm not a media critic, but here's my thoughts on the, you know, um, that goes back to what I was saying about, you know, bias is like a natural human trait, and as long as people understand where you're coming from, they can understand how to distill what you're putting forward.
Yeah, it's like the Charles Barkley, where it's like you're in a position of being a role model, but you're also like, I'm not a role model. It's like it's always tough like that because you get sometimes you get this put onto you, and you're like, well, I'm not like that, but I do have an opinion. I think that matters. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you head over to www.bookupapp.com to download our app so you can connect with your favorite bookish content creators, start conversations, and start your own book club.